Hello class. Our today's topic is population interaction. Actually, there is no known natural habitat on this earth that is inhabited just by a single species. Such a situation is even inconceivable. For any species, the minimum requirement is one more species on which it can feed. Even an autotrophic organism like plant species cannot survive alone. It depends upon the decomposition activity of soil microbes that is responsible for breakdown of organic matter inside the soil to fulfill their inorganic nutrient requirement. So plant also depend on animal agent for their pollination also. So in nature, animal, plant and microbes do not and cannot occur in isolation. They interact in various ways to form a biological community. This community of interactions, where populations of two or sometimes more than two different species interact, are called as interspecific interaction. Such interspecific interactions are mainly of three types: for the beneficial or for the positive interaction, sometimes detrimental means negative interaction, and sometimes it may be neutral, neither harmed nor benefited to one of the species, or sometimes for both. So these interactions between these populations are in form of the predation, competition, parasitism, Commensalism, Emensalism and Mutualism. These are the six type of interaction which is found in between the two species. So population interactions, if both the species benefited, is called the mutualism, and if both lose, it is called the competition. In their interactions with each other, in both parasitism or predations, only one species benefit, parasite or predators, that is respectively, and the interactions is detrimental, means harmful to the other species, that are host and prey respectively. The interactions where one species is benefited and the other is neither benefited and nor, is called the commensalism. In Emensalism, on the other hand, one species is harmed, whereas the other is unaffected. So predations, parasitism and commensalism share a common characteristics, that interacting species live closely together. So now come to the first type of interactions in between the two species, that is the mutualism. Uh, Plant and fungal mutualism is a very common example that is found in the lichen and mycorrhiza. Lichen is the association of one algae and one fungus, phycobiont and mycobiont. In this mutualistic relationship between a fungus and a photosynthesizing green algae, or we can say it may be cyanobacteria or blue-green algae. So it produces the algal part, or the phycobionts produced food through the process of photosynthesis, whereas the fungus, which is known as the mycobionts, it absorbs nutrients from the soil. And second association is mycorrhiza. Mycorrhiza is a mutualistic relationship between a fungus and root of higher plant. So in this association, a fungus absorb the essential nutrients from the soil, while the plant in turn provide the energy yielding carbohydrates to the fungi. One very important mutualism is found in the pollination or pollinating agents, like between fig and fig wasp, in the orchids and the bees, that is the Mediterranean orchids like Ophrys employ the sexual deficit also, and in this case fig wasp, there is a light or very tightly relationship between the pollinator species of wasp and many species of the fig tree. In this case, the female wasp using this fig fruit as a oviposition, means egg laying site, and developing seeds for the nourishing for their larva. The wasp pollinates the fig inflorescence while the reaching to the suitable egg laying oviposition sites. In case of the orchids and bee relationship, to ensure the guaranteed pollinations while attracting the right pollinator, insect means bees, or in the bumble's bees, like in the case of the orchids plant, it involve bee by deriving diversity of the floral formula, like you can say it is an orphis employ a sexually deficit to get the pollination done by a species of the bee, that is the in case of the Mediterranean orchid plant. One petal of its flower that look like uncanny resemblance to its female part or the female partner of the bee in size, color and marking. So the male bee that perceive that it is a female partner and dusted with pollen from the flower during the process of pseudocopulation. This is this pseudocopulation with another flower going to for another flower, and it transfer the pollen from one flower to the another flower in case of the office flower. So these are the very wonderful and very beautiful example of the mutualism. And one example is also the protocooperation. So it is an association between the two species in which both are benefited in presence of each other. Example of this is the sea anemone and the hermit crab. And in this case, the sea anemone attached to the body of the hermit crab, protect it from the enemies with its nematocysts cell that is present, and in return the anemone receive the pieces of food that dropped by the crab, and it is carried to a new place by it. So this is also a very good example of the mutualism. And in this mutualism, like in the nectar for the plants that depend on the insect for the pollination in return to give their nectar to the pollen to eat. Sometimes animal help the plant and seed dispersal also, and in return they give the fruits and animals as a food also. This is the fig plant. You can see a fig tree and the pollinator species of wasp. The fig species can be pollinated by its partner wasp only. So these are the examples of mutualism. The second example is the interactions is the competition. It occurs between the very close species when resources are very limited. So in this interactions both will get harmed, and this is known as the Gauss's competition exclusion principle. This principle states that when the two closely related species compete for the same resource, the inferior should be eliminated, and both cannot coexist at any time. So competition is an interactions among the individual of same species, that is in between the intra-specific, or sometimes between the individual of the different species also, means inter-specific also. This competition between the individual of the same species is for the same resources, but here the resources are very limited according to the Darwin's law also. In some case the resources need not be limiting for the competition to occur. The feeding efficiency of one species might be reduced due to the interfering of the other species. Few examples of this competition, that Abington tortoise in the Galapagos Islands became extinct within a decade after goats were introduced into the land. And why it happens? But it is happens that due to the in fact that the goat had the greater browsing efficiency than the tortoise. So unrelated species also compete for the same resources. It is a very good example of the flamingo and the fish compete for the zooplankton in case. So this is also example. This picture is of the flamingo. Flamingos are competing for the same zooplankton. What is the competitive release in between these competition? So, a species whose distribution is restricted to a small geographical area, if it is found in a very few areas on the earth, because of the presence of competitive superior species, is called the competitive release also. These species is found to expand its distributional range dramatically when the competing species is experimentally removed. If one species is removed, the other will be dramatically increase in their number. So Gauss' competitive exclusion principle is fulfilled here. That principle that state that the two closely related species competing for the same resources cannot exist together, and the competitively inferior will be eliminated by the superior species. Sometimes the resource partitioning is also reason for that. It is the mechanism meant for the coexistence of species to face the competition. So according to this, if two species compete for the same resources, they could avoid the competition sometimes by choosing the different time for the feeding. If they choose the different type of feeding, there is no competition in between them, or sometimes the different foraging patterns also found. For example, given by the MacArthur, shows that the 5 very closely related species of the warbles that is living on the same tree were able to coexist and avoid the competition by having the behavioral differences in their foraging, means the hunting activities. If they uh, change their hunting activities, they all can survive together rather than the competition in between, and the resources are very limited here also. So this is all the example of this competition also, and it is totally unrelated species in between the totally related species. Next interactions very common, that is the parasitism. Parasitism means there is a parasite also. So in this interaction, one species depend on other. One called the parasite, that is benefited, and other called the host, and host always get the harmed. So parasite have lost the senses. So parasite have no senses. Digestive system, it has no digestive system, but have a very high reproductive values there. Very power of reproductive values is very very high, and sometimes this parasite may be ectoparasite and endoparasite both. So parasitism is the inter-specific interactions where one of the species, that is the parasite, and depend the other, that is known as the host. Actually host is meant for the food and shelter both. So host get harmed in any case, and the parasite get benefited. So parasite are not specific, and parasite and its host tend to the co-involve sometimes. Co-involve means that if the host involved in a very special mechanism to reject or resist the parasite has to evolve the mechanism to neutralize them. So parasite adaptation is there. The parasite tends to co-evolve with this method, and it may loss of the sense organ also. Presence of suckers is very very important, and hooks in case of the parasite, and loss of the digestive system. No digestive system is there. It absorbs directly their food and juices from the host, and very high reproductive capacity, so can survive in any case. Some parasites have a very complex life cycle sometimes, and generally have one or two intermediate hosts. So intermediate host acts as a vector. It is just a vehicle with which facilitate the parasitism or parasitation of the host cell. For example, that human liver fluke has two intermediate hosts, that are snail and a fish. One snail is there and one fish is there. There is a two host. And in case of the example, we are going to take the example of the malarial parasite. It has one intermediate host, that is the mosquito, to spread to other host. So sometimes human lice and ticks as ectoparasite, it is not going to penetrate inside the human body. And copypods are the ectoparasite on some marine fishes also. You have seen a very good example of a plant, that is cuscuta, or you can see it is a dodder or amarbale. It is a parasitic plant that grow on the tree or sometimes on the shrubs also. What is the characteristics of this cascota? It lost its chlorophyll leaves during the evolution process, and it get its nutrition from the host plant by penetrating organ that is known as the hostoria inside the tissue of the higher plant, and it will get its nutrients from the host plant. One very important type of parasitism is found in the birds, some birds, which is that birds are not going to make the nest. And a very good example of this parasitism is known as the brood parasitism, when the birds lay their eggs in other birds' nest. The example is the cuckoo, the quail always lays their eggs in the crow nest for the development of their birds, their babies. And predation is the another interactions. It is an inter-specific interaction in which an animal that is called the predator it going to kill and consume the weaker one, and the weaker one is called the prey. It is a natural way to transfer the energy. We know that the energy is going from the first tropic level to the last tropic level. How it is going to transfer this energy from the herbivore to the carnivore? So consume it is a nature actually way to transfer the energy from the low tropic level to the high tropic level. And in this case, the nature provides some defense mechanism to the prey also in the predation's case. Look at this picture. This is the example of the predation. One is the prey, another is that is going to consume. Predator and the prey, the tiger and the deer, and sometimes any animals that is a superior animal is going to predate the prey. So keep prey population under control. Very very important for that, this transfer of energy from tropic level, and sometimes keep the prey population under control. Biological pest control method is also used in the agriculture, are the based on the ability of predator to regulate the prey population sometimes, and maintain the species diversity in the community also. This is the method. And some fact that related to the predations are the prudent predator, evolution of various defenses like adaptation in the prey, like a camouflage, chemical defense, mimicry, warning coloration. So many prey species have evolved with the various defenses like camouflage. So predations in between this transfer of energies, and predations keep the prey population under control. Otherwise sometimes we know that the prey reach very high population density and cause the imbalance to the ecosystem also. So sometimes predators are used as a biological control for the pest also. So for example, the lady bird are used to control the aphids, and dragonfly for the mosquitoes also. This is the aphids and the mosquito. Here is the mosquito, picture of mosquito and aphids. So these involved with the various defense. Earlier we are told that one is the camouflage, chemical defense, mimicry, warning colorations. For example, that certain in species and frog have the camouflage. Camouflage actually it is an cryptic colorations. The animal can change their skin color according to the surface. You can see in this picture a frog changes its color, and one insect is just like a leaf. So the predator is confused whether it is a prey or not. Sometimes that is the camouflage, means cryptic appearance of an organism that is similar to the object that found in the surrounding environment to protect itself from the predator. It occurs in some species of insect and frog also. This is actually the way to easy detections by the predators to avoid their easy detection. Sometimes the chemical defense also, like uh, some prey species are very very poisonous and therefore avoided by the predators. And the example is the monarch butterfly. Is a very distasteful to spray. It has a very special chemicals in its body. The chemical produced during its caterpillar stage by feeding on a poisonous weed actually. So it's avoided by the predator. This chemical is acquired from this poisonous weed when it is in the caterpillar stage. So one example is the mimicry also. It refers to the resemble of one organism to another or to the natural object amongst them is life. So during mimicry, the subject is known as mimic or mimetic, and the object is copies is called the model, just like in mimicry also. And sometimes warning coloration also, that concealing from as well as coloration enable the animal species to avoid its natural predator also. So because the problem of the predations is more severe for the plant than the animal as they cannot move. So about the 20% of the known insects are the phytophagous. Phytophagous means they depend upon the plant sap. So predators are more dangerous to the plants. These are the sometimes the chemical defense also, the morphological defense also here against the herbivore, like thorn in the bougainvillea and spines in the acacia or the babool plant. It's developed due to this thorn. The grazing animals is not going to in contact with these herbs. So this is the defense mechanism of some plants on the basis of their change their morphological structure. So sometimes some plants secretes a very poisonous substances also, like calotropis in the case of the madar plant. It produces a very highly poisonous glycosidase, that is a cardiac poison also. Sometimes nicotine, caffeine, quinine, citrulline, opium, they are the chemicals that produced by the plant, and it is totally against for the herbivore, because herbivore are totally depend upon the plants for their nourishment. Next is the commensalism. Next, commensalism and commensalism, actually in this interactions one species get benefited but other will not benefited, not harms. So no, there is no effect is found on that. So orchids, like for example that orchids growing on the mango tree, and one example is that barnacles on the back of the whale also. Sometimes you see that in the grazing field, in the grazing animals, on the top there is a bird named the egrets is found on that area and that back of that animal. So sometimes the epiphytes also, that epiphytes is also known as the orchids, it growing on the other plant like mango, to host and get benefited in terms of the shelter, but host neither derives any benefit or not it get harms. Actually barnacles, that is the growing on the back of the whale, benefit in form of the shelter. The whale remain unaffected for that. And one very good example is that clownfish on the sea anemone. So clownfish, actually very small fish that lives among the sea anemone. It get protection from the predators which stay away from the stinging tentacles of the sea anemone, because sea anemone have stinging tentacles there. And in case of the egrets, is found on the cattles. Basically it is a bird, egret is a bird that foray close to whether the cattles are grazing, because the cattles as they move steer up and flush out from the vegetation insects, and otherwise might be difficult for the egret to find and catch. So these are the example of the commensalism. You can see in this picture the egrets are found on the buffalo top and on the horse also. The barnacles is coming very close to that fish. So you can see the whale have no effect of that, and a very small clownfish is found just near the tentacles of the sea anemone. So commensalism is an inter-specific interactions, and the example, very good example, are the epiphytes, the orchids, barnacles, and association between the egrets and grazing cattle. You can take the example of some sucker fish on the back of the shark also. Sometimes the sucker fish is found on the back of the shark also. They suck the and feed from this whale 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 and the suckerfish on the shark also. Next is the Emensalism. Next or the last one is the Emensalism. Actually, Emensalism is the interaction between the two different species. It is not in between the same species. It is between the two different species in which one harmed but other have no effect. Examples of this interaction is the penicillin fungus. That you know that penicillium is a fungus responsible to develop antibiotic that is named the penicillin, and which can kill other microorganisms, but it may have no effect on its own. So this is the example of the Emensalism. And in the organism which inhibit the growth of the another organism, that is called the Emensal, Amensal, Emensal, and the phenomena of inhibition of growth of one species by the other species through the secretion of certain chemicals, that chemicals in case of the plants also. Combinedly, this antibodies or biological antagonism is known as the allelopathy. So allelopathy is the terms for this any kinds of chemicals produced. Sometimes you can see one another example of this Emensalism is that roots of black walnut, that is the Juglans rhizopia, that secrete a chemical jugatone which is a very toxic to other plant like apple and alfalfa also. And convolvulus inhibit the growth of the weed also sometimes. So different species of the streptomyces, it is an actinomycetes that produce the very wide range of the chemicals which inhibit the growth of other bacteria also. So some of which cause various disease in the human being also. Such chemicals isolated from this microorganism are thus used as antibiotics for curing various diseases caused by the bacteria, but bacteria have no harms of uh, these chemicals. So Emensalism, and one is killing but another is not affected. In this picture you can see this plant, one is harmed, another have no effect. These chemicals produced by these plants, a penicillin fungus or any other bacteria is responsible for that. So bacteria and fungi are the very good example of the Emensalism. This chapter is now completed. Thank you and have a nice day.